Welcome to the Retaining WIT podcast. I'm Josie Haynes.
And I'm Jordana Kwok.
This show tackles the challenges of keeping women in tech.
Each episode, we discuss current events, experiences in the industry, and what it takes to create a workplace where women will thrive. On today's episode of the Retaining WIT podcast, we are joined by Farzona Pulatova, engineering leader in Silicon Valley. In this episode, we explore the confidence gap and its impact on women leaders in the tech industry. Our guest shares her insights on why women often struggle with confidence and how this can hold them back in their careers. We discuss practical strategies for building confidence, including tips for overcoming imposter syndrome and cultivating a growth mindset. Before we dive in, though, let me take a moment to introduce her. Farzona is an engineering leader with 16 years of experience in the tech industry with a history of leading teams to build consumer-facing products at Masterclass, Uber, Twitter, and Orbitz, to name a few. She's passionate about mentoring and coaching women in various stages of their careers and increasing the number of women in organizations. She has also helped create, lead, and support women-focused ERGs and initiatives in the workplace. On a personal note, Farzona is a big fan of audiobooks and is always on the hunt for reading and listening to something new. Farzona, thank you for joining us today. We're looking forward to learning more about your career journey and then diving into our conversation on closing the confidence gap.
Yeah, thanks for having me here.
Excited to have you. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, I'm very happy speaking to both of you.
Yes, and we both are most likely going to chat about what audiobooks we all like after this finishes too, because I love audiobooks as well. So, but let's dive into our topic. So why don't we start from the beginning? Tell us a little bit about your career journey and what inspired you to move into leadership.
Yeah, great question. My journey into leadership, I would say, started a few years into my career as an engineer when I was sort of at the crossroads of, going down the individual contributor path or pivoting into management. And I had been entertaining the thought of becoming a manager and, slowly coming to a realization that I was enjoying, mentoring others, leading projects, onboarding new employees, and seeing their eyes light up when I was able to teach or, explain a certain topic. And, I felt like I was getting a lot of joy and reward out of those things. And I had a supportive manager at the time who, saw those early leadership signs that I was exhibiting and encouraged me to pursue this path, which, was a good validation to have at the time. And that was 10 or 11 years ago. And, I've been on that path ever since.
Thank you so much for sharing. And in your experience, what are some of the unique challenges that women in tech face when it comes to building confidence and advancing their careers?
Well, one thing that happens far too often that a lot of women are very much familiar with, including myself, is being the only in the room, not having role models to look up to, not having sponsors who are elevating women, or sometimes the environment isn't set up properly, especially if it's a male-dominant place. And if you witness, women around you being treated poorly, that very likely shatters, the confidence or trust that you can be successful in that environment. And in a broader sense, I think the idea or definition of leadership in people's heads often tends to be somebody who's a male, somebody who speaks a lot, who has a loud voice, perhaps somebody who interrupts a lot or is overly assertive. And this sometimes unfortunately gets conflated with confidence. To me, most of these traits, especially if overdone, are a turnoff. The way I see confident is, somebody who's thoughtful, somebody who listens more, has high EQ, or is empathetic, somebody who questions themselves, maybe every now and then to make sure they're making valid and accurate claims. Somebody who is able to read the room before chiming in, somebody who's secure in themselves and is authentic. Those things to me are confident as hell. So how do we get sort of more people to see this side of confidence too, and perhaps rethink what the word means? So I think this contributes to the challenges that a lot of women in tech face.
I love that you're talking about changing the definition a little bit, because yes, so often, confidence and like that aggressive leadership style get combined, and we can lead authentically and confidently as women leaders and still be assertive without ever touching any of those aggressive traits. And so, for our next question, can you share an example of a time when you struggled with some of this self-doubt or imposter syndrome that we know causes those confidence gaps, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, and the way I look at this question is like, when have I not? Right? I face these things all the time. So overcoming it is not necessarily a one-time event, but more of a continual thing for me. But over time, I have developed a few strategies that help me deal with it. It used to be that whenever I had a big thing in front of me, I would overthink it and come up with all sorts of reasons why I should back out. Think about every single scenario, every single edge case that could possibly go wrong, and eventually end up not pursuing those opportunities. So one thing that I found that worked for me to counteract that was this idea of pre-committing to things. So without going over every detail in my head, I do a quick analysis in my head and ask myself, at a high level, does it generally sound like something I could do? Does it sound like a good opportunity? And if the answer is more or less a yes, then I just sign up and pre-commit and tell myself that I'll figure it out as it gets closer, or I'll worry about the details later. And this way I'm at least half of the way there. And from there, the chances are high that I'll actually go through with it. So this tends to be like an important tactic that has served me well so far.
Yeah, and I can imagine that doing this over and over again would increase your level of confidence as well, because now you have this history built up, and every time you pre-commit, you just know that, yeah, I can follow through, like you've done it before. So I love this strategy that you just shared. And in terms of other strategies, what are some other ones that you've found effective in building confidence in not only yourself, but in others?
Preparation. That's one thing that comes to me to my mind. And preparation for me has always been sort of this number one antidote against low confidence. What I mean by that is, if there's a specific area that I'm not feeling certain about, I say study that specific subject and fill that gap. So in a way, over prepare for the parts that are bothering you or that you're not feeling certain about. Sometimes you hear this advice, fake it till you make it. I found that it's not as effective for me. I feel like maybe it gets you a little bit further, but doesn't necessarily address the root cause the way a preparation would. Be genuinely curious. It's another method that I found to be useful, especially when asking a question in a work meeting, for example. If your questions are coming from a place of curiosity versus asking a question just for the sake of speaking out, I found the former comes across far more confident. Depending on the situation, mental reframing can be helpful too. If you need to give a talk to a large audience at a conference, let's say, and you're nervous, reframing it as, this is exciting, or maybe turning it into a teaching moment could also be helpful. That way, the way I see it, it's no longer about you being in the spotlight, but it's about the people in the audience who are there to learn something from you. The more I think about it, this reminds me of a study from a while ago that I read that found men tend to be more confident leaders and women are more competent leaders. So once the competent part is covered, I see no reason to hold back on nailing the confident part. And as far as building confidence in others, I personally try to look for moments where I can give positive reinforcement or praise when I see somebody who's doing a good job. Something as simple as, that was a well thought out presentation, or I really like the way you solved that problem, or a simple, you got this, delivered at the right moment. Right? And these encouragements or confidence boosting moments don't have to be something big. I think constantly delivered micro praises can go a long way too. And Another thing that comes to mind, maybe giving credit to somebody in a meeting, especially if you're in a position of power or a position of leadership, and calling out someone's name like very specifically, like as Alice mentioned before, or as Alice explained before, or thanks to Alice's solution, or whatever the case may be. So promoting or elevating somebody else's work more broadly can help that person gain more confidence or validation that may be needing at the time.
Thank you so much for sharing these. And I love that you touched on that fake it till you make it, because I do believe you need to take action, right? And that's to what builds confidence, right? It's doing those uncomfortable things. But if you don't do those other things you mentioned, like the preparation, the curiosity, the mental reframing, you're always just fighting what feels like an uphill battle. And so I love that you touched on that. And I also love that when you were talking about confidence in others, it's about those positive reinforcements, right? I think so often, especially leaders focus on negative feedback, right? They want to correct things. And it's like, positive feedback and reinforcing what you want to see more of is more effective in a lot of ways than the negative feedback, right? We need 3 pieces of positive feedback for every negative piece of feedback we give somebody. So I love that you touched on those things. And so to kind of continue on the lines of like helping others, right? How can leaders create that more inclusive workplace that supports the confidence and career growth of not just women, but other underrepresented groups as well?
Yeah, that's a great subject, and I feel like there's a lot to unpack here. One thing that a lot of companies that I see do is form ERGs, employee resource groups, to support women and other underrepresented groups. And these can play out really well and serve as a great resource or as a great internal network. I've been involved in a few of these and tried a few ways to make ERGs more effective. There's obviously many different ways you can position it, like using it as a safe space for women to share their challenges, or a place to perhaps role play certain scenarios with each other, or a space to get career advice from the community. So the way I see it, there are endless ways you can get value out of the ERGs if they're set up well. And beyond that, as a company, you should also be assessing sort of the employee practices that are in place. Like audit your promotion processes, right? Are they structured in an inclusive way? Take a look at who you are recognizing. What type of behavior are you, rewarding and elevating? And on the flip side, are you discouraging and addressing poor behavior? Take a look at who holds the decision-making power. That tends to be an important one too. Are women and underrepresented minorities in those rooms? What do your retention and hiring processes look like, right? Retention sometimes is more important could be more important than hiring practices. Once you do get more women into the door, now what are you doing about it to keep them there? It becomes an important question. Leaders have a lot of power and say, and frankly responsibility, I would say, in addressing these things. It's often a matter of intentional focus, conscious efforts, or sometimes admitting that there's a problem and taking action towards correcting them. One thing I say a lot is like ask your employees. You'd be surprised at what people are willing to tell you. If you're willing to initiate a conversation. Educate the leaders right properly on this topic of supporting women and other minority groups, where self-education is a thing. Sometimes I see male allies who are very proactive, who support and elevate women, who put themselves in a place of addressing different issues, and they're helping make systemic changes. And they're not doing it to look cool, but it comes from a genuine place of wanting to be part of a solution. So how do we get and create more of these people? And lastly, I would say hold people accountable. Right? If you see less than ideal behavior in a workplace, telling women to speak up on their own behalf can be a huge ask. So how do we train the managers to be more aware and cognizant of the issues that may be taking place, so that they're the ones noticing and speaking up and addressing things first? So these are the things that come to mind when I think about the space.
These are all really great. You cover a whole spectrum of different ways from grassroots, so ERGs all the way to leadership. I do feel strongly that it needs to come from both sides, and it's not just leadership. It's not just through grassroots efforts to be able to make some of these changes. I'm curious to hear what advice you have to give to women who are struggling with self-doubt and imposter syndrome and who want to build their confidence and succeed as leaders in tech.
First, I would say identify why that's the case, right? Why are you struggling? Maybe it's a toxic environment, or maybe you're not in a position where you can influence any type of change. And in those situations, the right thing to do is, perhaps for you to get out of that environment and, perhaps find a more supportive environment. But apart from that, I'd say, seek out role models, mentors, find allies, sponsors. Skip-level managers, I found, make great sponsors. So building solid relationships with them can go, a long way. We talked about internal ERGs just now, but there's also a lot of resources these days externally as well. Women-focused external groups or communities you can join who can help you practice, who are willing to give you, real and specific advice, or serve as a sounding board, or bring an outsider's perspective, which might be very important to whatever issue that you might be facing at the time. And going back to what I mentioned earlier, remember that building confidence is not an overnight thing. It takes time, it takes practice to build it up over time. And once you've accomplished something that makes you uncomfortable, then you can use that as your confidence boost for the next thing. And you can keep going and pursuing the next thing after that, and go after something even more challenging.
Thank you for sharing these. They are great tactical pieces of advice that women can leverage. And I love that you touched on the fact that it isn't an overnight thing. And, something that you had mentioned earlier about preparation, right? You build confidence by building self-trust, and you build that self-trust through those small, consistent actions that you commit to. So often, we overachieve and we want to do 1,000,001 things. And then we're like, oh my gosh, but I'm not getting everything done. If instead you're building trust and confidence by saying, I'm going to commit to this one thing every day, even if that's a small thing. I tell a lot of my clients, start by committing to making your bed in the morning if that's something you do, or journaling for 5 minutes, or exercising for just 5 minutes, right? It's not about the second we try to overcommit, then our confidence can really get impacted. And so I really love that you touched on that. It's not an overnight thing. And so thank you so much for sharing your insights and wisdom with us today. And before we wrap up the episode, we always like to ask our guests to share a retaining wit tip of the week. So Farzona, what is one tip you'd like to share with women in the tech industry?
That is a good one. Let's see. What I would say is, take a leap of faith. This is something that's been on my mind lately. The world has been, I feel like, exceptionally uncertain these days, with market conditions, with different world events taking place all around us, the topic of AI generating a lot of buzz and its implications. So it's hard to tell how things are going to play out. So what I would say is, don't wait, take the leap. You don't have to have the long term figured out, because who knows what will happen. Life is too short not to go after your dreams and miss out on something you really want to pursue. So I hope in a small way, this helps women out there who may be, hesitating to take the first step in whatever it is they may be putting off, and serve as a little nudge.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the tip, Farzona. Great to have you on.
Thank you so much for being on the episode today. It was great having you.
Thank you both. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and chat with you both.
All right. Bye.
Bye. This podcast comes to you in collaboration with the SheTO community. Did you know that less than 9% of engineering exec roles are held by women? SheTO is on a mission to change that. SheTO is a private network for women and non-binary engineering leaders with the goal of accelerating careers of our members and building their high-powered network. Learn more at sheto.org.
Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Retaining WIT podcast. You can keep up with our episodes at retainingwit.com, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast shows. Please be sure to subscribe and leave a review so we can grow our audience. Thank you.